Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath. We have the starts and sits you need for Week 16 if we know who's playing. That's the biggest question. One thing we do know, though, is that no Leonard Fournette. He's not going to go for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which opens the door for Ronald Jones to have a monster performance, and he is the start of the week for the semifinals in your fantasy playoffs. Look, it's a great opportunity for Ronald Jones. We saw last year 4 times where Leonard Fournette did not play, and it was Ronald Jones taking over at least 19 total touches, at least 84 total yards in each of those 4 games, 3 total touchdowns over that span. Great matchup coming up against the Carolina Panthers. They've struggled in the last 3 weeks against the likes of Myles Gaskin, Mike Davis, and Devin Singletary. At least all 3 of those guys scoring at least 13 PPR points or more. So with what we're dealing with, Ronald Jones might be number 1 for me by the end of the week, but he's got top 10 potential. What are you guys doing? What? I mean, come on.
This is PPR rankings, and we know that he's not going to be a big factor in PPR. He might get 1 or 2 catches in the game.
He might get 1 or 2 touchdowns.
He might get 1 or 2 touchdowns as well. Well, I would start one rankings change that I haven't made yet, but I will, is putting Alvin Camaro behind him with the Ian Book news. I would feel more comfortable with Rojo at this point. That might sound really silly in 6 days or so, but for now, I'm okay doing it because his Panthers defense, 13 or more PPR points to a running back in 4 of their past 5 games, plenty of big games allowed to running backs all season long. I don't see another running back on the Bucs roster who's going to take him off the field that much this week, but I do think that there's going to be plenty of plays where Brady handles things, and he doesn't necessarily run, but instead of throwing to his running back, which he's done so much with Leonard Fournette, he'll check down to his tight ends, he'll check down to Antonio Brown. I think that you'll see a lot more of Brady throwing this week. I think he'll throw a lot of passes against Carolina.
Yeah, the only concern is that he comes off on passing downs. It's Le'Veon Bell playing on 3rd downs. It's
if
not,
he's ready.
Not catching any passes. That's the only concern.
It's Le'Veon Bell.
Yep.
Oh, please, Bruce.
4 years ago, that would have been a big deal.
Bruce Arians. No Le'Veon Bell. Keep him away. All right, in any event, big game coming for Ronald Jones. Let's show you some other starts for me this week. Joe Burrow's in a great spot. He hasn't been a very good fantasy quarterback lately, but he did do well against the Ravens in Week 7. That was in Baltimore. The secondary is a mess. Joe Mixon is playing, but he's playing through an ankle injury, so big game coming for Joe Burrow, and I think he's got top 10 upside. I would start him over Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes in the current circumstances right now. Let's talk about your starts for this week, Heath, and you have some guys that are in some good spots, coming off some strong games in Miles Sanders, Russell Gage, and Christian Kirk. Dak Prescott's a little bit questionable, and Devin Singletary is always questionable for fantasy managers. So talk about Singletary and what his upside could be against the Patriots.
Devin Singletary has mostly been not questionable when Zach Moss has been not active. And Moss has mostly been inactive unless they're playing in a terrible weather game. I don't think this will be that. So I'm expecting Singletary to have 15-plus touches against a Patriots defense that is pretty much okay if you run the ball against them between the 20s. So I do think it's an opportunity for him to see 15-plus touches, have 75 to 80 yards, and you see he's trending upwards. He will keep trending in that direction. 20 fantasy points this week.
Yeah, I think the key is it's kind of, does he do anything not just in the 20s?
Right.
You know, does he score and does he work in the passing? Because if he has those opportunities, then he has a chance for a pretty significant matchup. All right, so we were talking a little bit. Let's just bring back Dak Prescott, because Dave, you're a little concerned about Dak. Keith, you're obviously, I don't know, all in, but you like Dak Prescott this week. I like Prescott this week, so sell Dave on Dak Prescott.
I just don't see anything with what's happening with the Cowboys that explains the recent struggles, other than the fact they've been on the road for the last 3 weeks, and we've seen these types of stretches from very good quarterbacks over the season. It happened to Josh Allen. It happened to Patrick Mahomes, and they've come back. I think this week against a Washington secondary that is still giving up the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks back at home, I'm trusting Dak.
And I get where you're coming from, and I really like the selling point that Washington played on Tuesday, and now they've got to play again on Sunday. It's a short week. Their defense is beat up. I think
they just lost Cole Holcomb, too.
Yeah, I mean, these are things, and Holcomb was the one who picked off Dak in that game a couple of weeks ago when Dak threw an errant pass. And that's part of the problem that I have with Dak, is that he's just not playing great right now. The offensive line isn't blocking very well for him. No Tyron Smith at left tackle. That's an issue. I think Dak can be okay. I just don't know how much upside that he's got. Selling me on him as a top 12 quarterback, I was already there. As a top 5 or 6 quarterback this week, I'm scared to do it, even though Washington, coming off the short week, playing poorly. How many rushing touchdowns is he going to have? Jalen Hurts had 2 last week. He threw for 1. If Dak scores 1 touchdown through the air and 1 on the ground, he'll be good, but he doesn't do that much, at least not this year.
Amari Cooper's got a great track record against them. I think, again, I just look at what he's done at home. 22 or more fantasy points in every home game this season. I think he's averaging like 27 points per game at home. He's just been a big number. So 3 straight road games is kind of what sold it for me. Back home, short week for Washington. I think he'll have a big game. So I'm with you, Heath, on that one. It sounds like Dave is getting on board the bandwagon. Let's talk about your starts for this week, Dave. And it's easy to see why we like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Great matchup against Pittsburgh. Probably a lot of running coming. Antonio Brown back is great. T. Higgins, Alan Lazard. We've seen these guys put up some good numbers recently. But let's talk about Melvin Gordon, because fantasy managers always want to know who's the best Broncos running back, and can you start both of them potentially this week against the Raiders?
The best Broncos running back this week will be Javonte Williams, but Melvin Gordon is definitely startable as a number 2 fantasy running back. We know that Drew Lock's going to be the quarterback for the Broncos. I think Denver tries and plays it conservatively against a Las Vegas team. They've allowed the 5th most rushing touchdowns per game to running backs this year. They allow a ton of rush yards per game. They've given up at least 10 non-PPR points to a running back on 10 of their last 11 games. And we've seen Melvin Gordon. This is in Denver's wins. At least 16.3 carries per game and 10-plus non-PPR points in 5 of 7. I say non-PPR for Melvin because he's really not a factor in full PPR. It's basically the same price. So he's a low-end number 2 running back in PPR, but as you get to half PPR, he goes up a little bit. And as you get to non-PPR, he's closer to like 18th at running back. I like him, and I think he's a safe start.
Has to score. That's clearly been a big part of his game, but good opportunity here in this matchup against the Raiders.